Chapter 19. Vanikoro. This terrible spectacle marked the beginning of the series of maritime disasters that the Nautilus would encounter on its journey. Since it had started traversing more frequented seas, we often saw shipwrecked hulls rotting away between two waters, and deeper down, cannons, cannonballs, anchors, chains, and 1,000 other iron objects, all being devoured by rust, still carried along by the Nautilus, in which we lived as if isolated. On December 11th, we came upon the Pomotu archipelago, the former dangerous group of Bougainville, which extends over a distance of 500 leagues, from east-southeast to west-northwest, between 13 degrees 30 and 23 degrees 50 south latitude, and 125 degrees 30 and 151 degrees 30 west longitude, from Ducie Island to Lazareff Island. This archipelago covers an area of 370 square leagues, and consists of about 60 groups of islands, among which is the Gambier group under French protectorate. These islands are of coral origin. A slow but continuous uplift caused by the work of polyps will one day connect them. Then this new island will later fuse with neighboring archipelagos, and a fifth continent will stretch from New Zealand and New Caledonia to the Marquesas. The day I developed this theory to Captain Nemo, he replied coldly, "It is not new continents the Earth needs, but new men." By chance, the Nautilus had been led precisely to Clermont-Tonnerre Island, one of the most curious in the group, discovered in 1822 by Captain Bell of the Minerva. I was then able to study this madreporic system that produces the islands of this ocean. The madrepores, which must not be confused with corals, have a tissue covered with a calcareous crust, and changes in its structure led Mr. Milne Edwards, my illustrious master, to classify them into 5 sections. The tiny animals that secrete this polyp live by the billions at the bottom of their cells. Their calcareous deposits become rocks, reefs, islets, islands. Here, they form a circular ring surrounding a lagoon or small inner lake, which breaches connect to the sea. There they create barrier reefs like those off New Caledonia and various Pomotu islands. Elsewhere, as in Reunion and Mauritius, they raise fringing reefs, high straight walls near which the ocean depths are considerable. By extending only a few cables from the cliffs of Clermont-Tonnerre Island, I admired the enormous work accomplished by these microscopic workers. These walls were especially the work of madreporarians called millicores, porites, astraeas, and meandrines. These polyps particularly develop in the agitated layers at the surface of the sea, and thus it is by their upper part that they begin these substructures, which gradually sink with the debris of secretions supporting them. Such, at least, is Mr. Darwin's theory to explain the formation of atolls, a theory, in my opinion, superior to that which gives submerged mountain or volcano peaks as the basis. For madreporic work, I was able to observe these curious walls very closely, for, beneath them, the sounding line showed more than 300 meters depth, and our electric lamps made this brilliant limestone sparkle. Answering a question from Conse about the rate of growth of these colossal barriers, I surprised him greatly by saying that scientists estimate this growth at 1/8 of an inch per century. So, to raise these walls, he said, it took X amount of time. 192,000 years, my brave Conse, which singularly lengthens the biblical days. Besides, the formation of coal, that is, the mineralization of forests buried by floods, required much more time. But I would add that the days of the Bible are only epochs, not the interval between two sunrises, for according to the Bible itself, the sun does not date from the first day of creation. When the Nautilus resurfaced on the ocean, I could see the entire extent of Clermont-Tonnerre Island, low and wooded. Its madreporic rocks were obviously fertilized by waterspouts and storms. One day, a seed, carried by the wind from neighboring lands, fell onto the calcareous layers, mixed with decomposed remains of fish and marine plants that formed the plant humus. A coconut, pushed by the waves, arrived on this new shore. The sprout took root. The tree growing stopped the water vapor. The stream was born. Vegetation gradually spread. Some tiny animals, worms, insects, arrived on trunks torn from windward islands. Turtles came to lay their eggs. Birds nested in the young trees. In this way, animal life developed, and attracted by the greenery and fertility, man appeared. Thus were formed these islands, immense works of microscopic animals. Towards evening, Clermont-Tonnerre disappeared in the distance, and the Nautilus's course changed noticeably after. Crossing the Tropic of Capricorn at the 135th degree of longitude, it headed west-northwest, ascending the whole intertropical zone. Although the summer sun was generous with its rays, we suffered no heat, for at 30 or 40 meters below the water, the temperature did not rise above 10 to 12 degrees. On December 15th, we left behind us to the east the enchanting Society Archipelago and the graceful Tahiti, Queen of the Pacific. In the morning, I saw, a few miles to leeward, the high summits of this island. Its waters supplied our table with excellent fish, mackerel, bonitos, albacores, and varieties of a sea snake called muneriphus. The Nautilus had traveled 8,100 miles. 9,720 miles were recorded on the log when it passed between the Tonga Tabou archipelago, where the crews of the Argo, the Port-au-Prince, and the Duke of Portland perished, and the Navigator Islands, where Captain de Langle, La Perouse's friend, was killed. Then it reached the VT archipelago, where the savages massacred the sailors of the Union, and Captain Bureau of Nantes, commander of the amiable Josephine. This archipelago extends over 100 leagues from north to south, and 90 leagues from east to west, between 6 degrees and 2 degrees south latitude, and 174 degrees and 179 degrees west longitude. It consists of a number of islands, islets, and reefs, among which are Viti-Levu, Vanuatu-Levu, and Candubon. It was Tasman who discovered this group in 1643, the same year Torricelli invented the barometer and Louis XIV ascended the throne. I leave it to you to judge which of these events was more useful to humanity. Next came Cook in 1714, d'Entrecasteaux in 1793, and finally Dumont d'Urville in 1827. We sorted out the geographical chaos of this archipelago. The Nautilus approached the Bay of Whalea, scene of the terrible adventures of Captain Dillon, who first shed light on the mystery of La Perouse's shipwreck. This bay, repeatedly dredged, provided excellent oysters. We ate them immoderately, opening them at our table, following Seneca's advice. These mollusks belong to the species known as Ostrea lamellosa, very common in Corsica. This Whalea bed must have been considerable, and certainly without multiple causes of destruction. These aggregations would eventually fill the bays, since up to 2 million eggs are counted in a single individual. And if Ned Land did not have to regret his gluttony on this occasion, it is because the oyster is the only dish that never causes indigestion. Indeed, it takes no less than 16 dozen of these mollusks to provide the 315 grams of nitrogenous substance needed for a single man's daily food. On December 25th, the Nautilus was sailing among the New Hebrides archipelago, discovered by Quiros in 1606, explored by Bougainville in 1768, and given its current name by Cook in 1773. This group consists mainly of 9 large islands and forms a band of 120 leagues from north-northwest to south-southeast, between 15 degrees and 2 degrees south latitude, and 164 degrees and 168 degrees longitude. We passed close enough to Oro Island, which, at noon observations, appeared to me as a mass of green woods dominated by a very high peak. That day was Christmas, and Ned Land seemed to deeply regret not celebrating Christmas, the true family holiday, which Protestants are fanatical about. I had not seen Captain Nemo for about a week, when, on the morning of the 27th, he entered the Grand Salon, always looking like a man who had left you just 5 minutes before. I was busy tracing the Nautilus's route on the map. The captain approached, placed a finger on a point on the map, and said only one word, Vanikoro. That name was magical. It was the name of the islets where La Perouse's ships were lost. I stood up suddenly. "The Nautilus is taking us to Vanikoro?" I asked. "Yes, Professor," replied the captain. "And I can visit those famous islands where the Boussole and the Astrolabe were wrecked?" "If you wish, Professor." "When will we be at Vanikoro?" "We are there, Professor." Followed by Captain Nemo, I climbed onto the platform and eagerly scanned the horizon. To the northeast appeared 2 volcanic islands of unequal size, surrounded by a coral reef measuring 40 miles around. We were facing Vanikoro proper, to which Dumont d'Urville gave the name Isle de la Recherche, and right in front of the small harbor of Vanu, located at 16 degrees 4 feet south latitude and 164 degrees 32 feet east longitude. The land seemed covered with greenery from the shore to the mountain tops, dominated by Mount Kapogo, 476 fathoms high. The Nautilus, after crossing the outer belt of rocks by a narrow pass, found itself inside the breakers, where the sea had a depth of 30 to 40 fathoms. Under the green shade of the mangroves, I saw a few natives who showed great surprise at our approach. Did they not see, in this long black body gliding at water level, some formidable cetacean they should beware of? At that moment, Captain Nemo asked me what I knew about La Perouse's shipwreck. "What everyone knows, Captain," I replied. "And could you tell me what everyone knows?" he asked, a bit ironically. "Very easily." I recounted to him what the latest research by Dumont d'Urville had revealed, summarized here. La Perouse and his second, Captain de Langle, were sent by Louis XVI in 1785 to make a voyage of circumnavigation. They commanded the corvettes Boussole and Astrolabe, which never returned. In 1791, the French government, justly worried about the fate of the 2 corvettes, fitted out 2 large ships, Rescorèche and Espérance, which left Brest on September 28th under the orders of Bruni de Entrecasteaux. 2 months later, news came from the deposition of a certain Bowen, captain of the Albermale, that wreckage had been seen on the coast of New Georgia. But D'Entrecasteaux, ignorant of this communication, uncertain anyway, headed for the Admiralty Islands, reported by Captain Hunter as the site of La Pérouse's shipwreck. His searches were in vain. Espérance and Rescaresh even passed Vanikoro without stopping, and the whole voyage was very unfortunate, costing the lives of D'Entrecasteaux, two of his seconds, and several crew members. It was an old Pacific hand, Captain Dillon, who first found indisputable traces of the castaways. On May 15, 1824, his ship, the St. Patrick, passed near Tikopia Island, one of the New Hebrides. There, a Lascar approached him in a canoe and sold him a silver sword hilt bearing engraved characters. This Lascar also claimed that, 6 years earlier, during a stay at Vanikoro, he had seen 2 Europeans who belonged to ships wrecked many years before on the island's reefs. Dillon guessed these were La Pérouse's ships, whose disappearance had stirred the whole world. He wanted to reach Vanikoro, where, according to the Lascar, there were many remains of the wreck, but the winds and currents prevented him. Dillon returned to Calcutta. There, he interested the Asiatic Society and the East India Company in his discovery. A ship named Research was placed at his disposal, and he left on January 23, 1827, accompanied by a French agent. The Recherche, after stopping at several points in the Pacific, anchored before Vanikoro on July 7, 1827, in the same harbor of Vanu where the Nautilus now floated. There, he collected numerous remains of the wreck: iron utensils, anchors, pulleys, small cannons, an 18-pound cannonball, fragments of astronomical instruments, a piece of a stern, and a bronze bell inscribed, "Bazin made me," a mark of the Brest Arsenal foundry, around 1785. Doubt was no longer possible. Dillon, completing his investigations, remained at the site until October. Then he left Vanikoro, headed for New Zealand, anchored at Calcutta on April 7, 1828, and returned to France, where he was warmly welcomed by Charles II. But at that moment, Dumont d'Urville, without knowledge of Dillon's work, had already left to search elsewhere for the site of the wreck. Indeed, it had been reported by a whaler that medals and a St. Louis cross were in the hands of the natives of Louisiade and New Caledonia. Dumont d'Urville, commanding the Astrolabe, took to the sea, and 2 months after Dillon had left Vanikoro, he anchored at Hobart Town. There he learned of Dillon's results, and also that a certain James Hobbs, second of the Union from Calcutta, after landing on an island at 8 degrees 18.4 south latitude and 156.30 east longitude, had noticed iron bars and red fabrics used by the natives. Dumont d'Urville, somewhat perplexed and unsure whether to trust these stories reported by unreliable newspapers, nevertheless decided to follow in Dillon's footsteps. On February 10, 1828, the Astrolabe arrived at Tikopia, took as guide and interpreter a deserter living on the island, set course for Vanikoro, sighted it on February 12th, followed its dot, reefs until the 14th, and only on the 20th, anchored inside the barrier in Vanu Harbor. On the 23rd, several officers circled the island and brought back a few unimportant remnants. The natives, adopting a system of denials and evasions, refused to take them to the site of the disaster. This suspicious behavior made people believe they had mistreated the castaways, and indeed, they seemed to fear Dumont d'Urville had come to avenge La Pérouse and his unfortunate companions. However, on the 26th, persuaded by gifts and realizing they had nothing to fear, They led the second-in-command, Mr. Jackanaut, to the scene of the wreck. There, in 3 or 4 fathoms of water, among the Pacu and Vanu reefs, lay anchors, cannons, iron and lead bars, all embedded in calcareous concretions. The Astrolabe's longboat and whaleboat were sent to this spot, and, not without great effort, their crews managed to retrieve an anchor weighing 1,800 pounds, an 8-pound iron cannon, a lead bar, and 2 bronze small cannons. Dumont d'Urville, questioning the natives, also learned that La Perouse, after losing his 2 ships on the island's reefs, had built a smaller vessel from the remains of both. Some sailors voluntarily remained at Vanikoro. The others, weakened and sick, left with La Perouse. They headed for the Solomon Islands and perished. All hands lost on the western coast of the main island of the group, between Capes Deception and Satisfaction. "And how do you know this?" I exclaimed. "This is what I found at the very site of this last shipwreck. Captain Nemo showed me a tin box stamped with the French arms, all corroded by salt water. He opened it, and I saw a bundle of yellowed but still legible papers. They were the very instructions from the Minister of the Navy to Commander La Perouse, annotated in the margin by Louis XVI himself. Ah, it is a beautiful death for a sailor," said Captain Nemo.